University before moving to Tampa in 2010. She's the author of Invalid Women, Figuring Feminine Illness in American Fiction and Culture, and co-editor of Feminisms, an Anthology of Literary Theory and Criticism. As you can tell, she's very qualified, and we're very excited to have her speak. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Brindle.
So let me do the short person thing and bring this person. All right, so a couple of things before I get started. I am from USF. I'm the chair of Women and Gender Studies. It is probably appropriate for me to point out that, however, I am speaking as a private citizen today. I'm not here representing USF's views, although I think I can tell you that my department backs me. Actually, what my colleagues say, you better say that. All right, I'll also say, I'm a whisker out of my comfort zone. I teach a course called Politics of Women's Health, but my primary research area is on representations of illness and representations of breast cancer, which is how I got into the field of studying women's health in general. So this is actually the first time I've ever spoken publicly outside of the classroom about abortion and abortion politics. So just as a kind of I don't know, advisory. Let me give you an overview about what I'm going to do today. I am an academic and a professor. I've been a professor for a really long time. And one of the things that I firmly believe is that when we talk about things, we should actually know what we're talking about, and we should use some evidence when we talk about it. We should not just talk about what we feel. Therefore, I'm going to talk a little bit about some evidence. And then I'm going to talk about a relatively new approach. The idea was formed in around 1994. It has been fairly prominent since 2003, but I'm going to talk about a concept called reproductive justice that is a little bit different from reproductive rights or reproductive freedom. It's a movement that comes out of the Women of Color movement, and I want to talk about how it reframes the debate over abortion. And I'm going to talk about what it seems to me would be a real pro-life policy, or a set of real pro-life policies. So first, some words about evidence. You may or may not know much about the feminist health movement of the 60s and 70s, but one of the things that came out of the feminist health movement was an insistence on the part of women in that movement that we base healthcare on evidence, not just on what doctors thought or believed. That care should come out of clinical studies, clinical trials, and actual evidence that something worked. We know that there were a lot of other patient empowerment movements that fell along with this. What we call that is evidence-based medicine. What I want to suggest is what we need to do now is move from evidence-based medicine to evidence-based policy. If we want to make something happen, rather than just stand on two sides of a river and scream at one another, women's studies students, you should be able to identify that reference. Rather than just stand on opposite sides of a river and scream at one another, we should actually have some possibility of talking about what really works. So, if we did that, we would have to work with facts. So here are some facts. According to a study published in The Lancet in 2012, abortion rates are higher in countries where abortions are illegal and unsafe. So if you want to stop abortion, you don't try to make it illegal. That just increases. Study after study shows that levels of abortion are tied to levels of unintended pregnancy, not legality. All right, now, if you want to unpack that Lancet study a little bit, one of the reasons that abortion rates are higher in countries where abortion is illegal is because those are also countries where access to birth control, access to family planning, and access to sexual education are also illegal, lacking, or inaccessible. So, where do we find places where there are low rates of abortion? Surprise, surprise, the lowest rate of abortion in the world, less than 10 per 1,000 women, is in Europe, where abortion is widely legal, widely available. Where also, by the way, so sex education is widespread and contraception is available at low or no cost. So again, the association that we can make is that abortion rates are high when rates of unintended pregnancy are high. If you want to stop abortion, stop unintended pregnancy. Don't criminalize abortion. By contrast, where does it not work? In countries in Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean, where abortion is widely illegal and the most restrictive, those are the countries that have the highest rates of abortion, 29 and 31 per 1,000 women. In other words, 3 times higher. Because those are also countries where access to birth control, family planning, and sexual education and sexual health are lacking. This is actually not rocket science. If we want to reduce rates of abortion, and you know, let's be honest, as much as I believe abortion needs to be free, legal, accessible, it's not in and of itself a good thing. Nobody thinks it is. Nobody is out there saying, yay, let's do more abortions. That's not how the world works. All right, you really want fewer abortions? Safe, reliable, free, easily available contraception. Overall accessible health care. And universal, scientifically accurate, and comprehensive sex education. One of the things that when I teach my politics and women's health class, that the students find the most shocking is that there are states where they've had to pass laws that sex education actually has to be scientifically accurate. Because you know when you finally get a law like that, that's because what they're teaching in schools is not scientifically accurate. If you want an example of the evidence for this, there's a really great project that went out of St. Louis University called Washington University in St. Louis. I always do that. The Choice Project, where they offered over 9,000 women free free birth control and information about how to use birth control and information about sex ed. And I know it will stun you, but the rates of unintended pregnancy and abortion dropped dramatically in their cohort. So let's think about this from another point of view, from a point of view of fundamental fairness. When we pass laws against abortion, or reduce access to it, or cut funding for it, who is really affected by those laws? It isn't women with money. All right, one of the things you've got to understand is that any woman with means will always have access to abortion. In all periods of history, this has been true. Women with money will always find a way. So, what we get now is a move in the mid-90s by a coalition of groups of women of color that kind of coalesced around Loretta Ross, whose picture is here, into a coalition of groups called Sister Song, which I'll talk about in a minute. Who argued that what we needed to do is move from talking about reproductive rights to reproductive justice. And this is kind of like the difference between lavender and purple. And I'm quoting another famous feminist there, right? Okay. So that's a group of students from my department, so I'm like, they better know what I'm talking about. So Loretta Ross wrote this: women of color activists demand reproductive justice, which requires the protection of women's human rights to achieve the physical, mental, spiritual, political, economic, and social well-being of women and girls. In other words, what they argued is that the singular focus on abortion misses out a whole world of issues. It's one thing to talk about the right to choice. If you're talking about a situation in which people actually get choices, but that is a middle-class notion that often doesn't apply to lots and lots of people in our culture. So, before I move on, let me talk a little bit about Sister Song, the full name of which is Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. They're a group of 80 local, national, and regional grassroots agencies and organizations. They were officially founded in 1997, but they really kind of started to coalesce in 1994 after the International Conference on Population Development in Egypt. They represent many communities. One of the things about this group is that they've really tried to cross bridges between different organizations representing women of color. So they're African American, Arab American, Middle Eastern, Asian and Pacific Islander, Latina, Native American, and indigenous peoples, as well as white allies. What they argue is that reproduction is a human rights issue, more than just a right or a freedom. It is a fundamental component of human rights, and as such, it's embedded in a lot of other kinds of issues around human rights. So, it is not just the right to choose abortion, although it certainly includes that. It is also being able to access abortion. It's great to say you can choose abortion when you can't get to a clinic, or you can't pay for what you could get at the clinic if you could get to the clinic. It's also, however, being able to use birth control that is safe, reliable, and affordable or free. So again, it's one thing to offer women birth control and then make it so expensive they can't afford it. Or offer them birth control that is so defective that they end up sterilized by it. It is also being able to get prenatal and other health care. So one of the things that we do in this country is make it impossible for someone to abort a pregnancy and then refuse to treat them and make sure that they can have a healthy pregnancy. And it's being allowed to parent your children in situations of health. So we refuse to let people have abortions, and then we refuse to support their children. We refuse to allow them good schools. We refuse to allow them to stay out of the prison system. We put them in drug-ridden neighborhoods, and then we arrest them for being in the drug-ridden neighborhood. That is part of reproductive justice. It is part of reproductive justice when your children are gunned down on the street. That is not the right to parent your children. So we need to reframe the debate. Whose lives do we really value? We claim that we value the unborn. What about the born? What about all the people who are here? What does it really mean to value life? Does it mean for us to surround ourselves with hate and poverty and violence and hunger and racism and homophobia environmental degradation that is mostly concentrated in poor neighborhoods, incarceration, health disparities, sterilization abuse, or denying the personhood of the pregnant woman. Whose lives are being valued? Now, if we can reframe the debate, we can move things forward in a different way. So I'm going to quote Loretta Ross again. It would be logical to assume that people who claim to value all human life from the moment of conception would fiercely support programs that help disadvantaged children and parents. It would be logical, right? Okay, but that's not how things play. What do we have out instead? All right, now bear in mind, all of this I'm talking about, let's think about evidence-based policy. There are things we know work, but what do we do instead? We attempt to prevent the funding, not just of abortion, but birth control and even health care for poor women. I was born in Texas, to my eternal shame. Texas used to be an interesting, good place. Remember Ann Richards?
Yes.
But now, Texas made a decision 2 years ago. They were so anti-abortion that they were going to not take any Medicaid funding for women's health care. 180,000 women in Texas lost all access to health care, not just abortion. I mean, we've been hearing a lot about the closing of the clinics in Texas, but you don't hear about that. Denial of basic health care. Now, bear in mind, there are proposals right now that they want to shut down funding to Planned Parenthood. 3% of Planned Parenthood's budget goes to abortion. And that is all private funding. It's none of the federal funding. 97% of Planned Parenthood's budget goes for basic health care, well woman screenings, birth control, and ovarian and breast cancer testing. By all means, we want to shut that stuff down, right? All right, closing clinics that provide abortions is also closing clinics that provide family planning. Impositions of waiting periods sound so reasonable, right? We just want to give you a chance to think about it. What it does is to question the rationality of the woman who's seeking the abortion, but what it really does is to inconvenience and probably enough to dissuade many poor women. And so think about it. You have to travel 100 miles to get to the nearest abortion clinic. Now, instead of finding transportation on one day to do that, you have to come back another day. So you either have to get transportation for 2 days, or God help you, you've got to find some way to stay in town. And that's going to make the cost of the abortion then the cost of food and hotel and lodging, or maybe you get to sleep in your car, if you have a car. Not to mention that you have to take off work. Barrier for rich women? No, it is not. Barrier for working women, poor women? Yes, it is. We restrict adoptions by gay, lesbian, and trans people. In what universe is that not supporting? What universe is that not? Is that helping children? You can tell it makes me so. It's so irrational. I get kind of tongue-tied about it. I should out myself here as an adoptive parent when I think about the fact that that's a right that's not given to everybody. It just makes me a little bit furious. Maybe a lot furious, but I better chill out. Okay, what we have instead, more things that we have instead. Restrictions that largely affect poor women who may not be able to access services in their first trimester. Why do women not get abortions in their first trimester? In many cases, it's because they're trying to put together enough money to pay for the abortion. And unlike wealthy women, coming up with the $450 in the space of about 6 weeks is not reasonable for them. Restrictions on government funding that affects women on Medicaid or women served by the Indian Health Service only affect poor women. One of the things that a lot of people who don't know much about Indian reservations don't understand is that the only clinic available to many Native American women is the Indian Health Service, which is entirely controlled by the federal government, which has a restriction on the kinds of money you can spend on family planning or abortion. So if you are on an Indian reservation, good luck with getting some decent health care. We have attempts in various states to require involuntary transvaginal ultrasounds before abortion, which by every state law, the involuntary introduction of an object into a woman's vagina is rape. So we are, in certain states, thinking about requiring physicians to rape their patients before they could get an abortion. In many places, we refuse pregnant women drug rehab treatment and then turn around and arrest them for endangering their fetus by using drugs, effectively criminalizing pregnancy altogether. So what do? One of the things that we do is we listen to poor women, women of color, and immigrant women when they tell us what they need. There's a brilliant campaign, Trust Black Women, that says, women aren't out to hurt their children. Women are out to try to make a better life for themselves and their children. Trust them. Try to help them. We can trust women to make choices that support their families and their well-being. We can support reproductive justice by offering safe, reliable, and free family planning, accessible health care, and opportunities to parent children well and into their adulthood. That's part of human rights. And we fight against those who are going to oppress poor and disadvantaged communities. And I think we have to call them out on it. You were probably, many of you were as thrilled as I was on Tuesday night to hear President Obama finally kind of come out swinging, kind of saying, where has he been for the last 6 years? We needed him. I actually think we're in a place where over 400 bills were introduced in various state legislatures last year trying to restrict abortions. We need to flood the legislatures with bills to protect the health and well-being of families, women, children, trans people, lesbian people, gay people. We need to flood them back. We need to call them out and say, who are you really valuing? So I'll call attention to one more project that I think is just brilliant. Some young women who've come up with the Repeal Hyde project. It's an art project. How do we use art to do this? And so they're coming up with all kinds of posters and projects that talk about why we need to, if you don't know what the Hyde Amendment is what they tried to make permanent, or they voted to make permanent on Tuesday, or Thursday. It is denying all federal funding for any kind of abortion. It's been renewed every year since 1974. They're trying to make it permanent. The Republicans are trying to make it permanent.